Hello and welcome back to the Sleepyhead Geographer. Tonight, let's take a moment together to breathe deeply and release the tensions that have gathered in your shoulders, your mind, and your heart from the day behind us. Feel yourself settling into this peaceful space we've created together, where learning and rest dance hand in hand like old friends. As you close your eyes, let me transport you to one of Earth's most mysterious places, the vast, silent expanses of our planet's great deserts. But these aren't the quiet wastelands you might imagine. Tonight, we'll discover something extraordinary hidden within the shifting sands. Deserts that sing, hum, and whisper haunting melodies that have puzzled travelers for centuries. Imagine walking across endless dunes under a star-filled sky when suddenly the sand beneath your feet begins to vibrate with deep, resonant tones. The very ground produces music, sometimes a low, organ-like boom that seems to emerge from the Earth's core, other times a gentle whisper that dances on the night wind. These are the singing dunes, and their mysterious voices have captivated explorers from Marco Polo to modern scientists. Let's journey together into this world where geology becomes symphony, where science meets ancient mystery, and where the desert reveals its most enchanting secret. In the heart of California's Mojave Desert, where the sun paints the land in gold and amber, stands one of nature's most enigmatic performers. The Kelso Dunes rise like a sleeping giant from the desert floor, their graceful curves sculpted by millennia of patient winds. But these are no ordinary dunes. Under just the right conditions, when the sand is dry, the air still, they produce sounds that seem to come from another world entirely. Let's begin our exploration by understanding what we mean when we speak of singing dunes. Picture yourself at the base of a dune stretching 300 feet into the sky. The sand beneath your feet is warm, even in the coolness of evening. Each grain is nearly identical in size, polished smooth by countless years of wind and weather. This uniformity is no accident. It is the first key to unlocking the desert's voice. Take your first step up the dune's face, and something remarkable begins. The sand shifts beneath your weight, and as millions of grains cascade down the slope, they vibrate in harmony. At first, you may hear only a faint hum, like a distant pipe organ warming up. But as more sand joins the flow, the sound deepens into a resonant boom that seems to emerge from the very heart of the earth. This phenomenon has stirred human imagination for thousands of years. Ancient desert peoples spoke of spirits dwelling in the dunes, of gods who sang lullabies to the stars. Legends told of sand jinn who guided lost travelers with haunting melodies, or warned them away from danger with ominous rumbles. The first recorded Western account came from Marco Polo in the 13th century. Crossing what is now China's Badayin-Jaran Desert, he described voices in the sand, the clash of cymbals, the beating of drums, and melodies that seemed to call travelers by name. To Polo and his companions, these were surely the voices of desert spirits inhabiting the vast emptiness between oases. Today, we know the truth is both simpler and more wondrous. Singing dunes perform a symphony of physics, revealing how matter behaves under perfect conditions. Each grain is like a tiny instrument, and when millions move together in just the right way, they create resonant frequencies that carry for miles across the desert. The science is intricate. When grains of similar size and shape slide down a slope, they form layers of moving sand separated by thin pockets of air. These act like the chambers of a wind instrument, amplifying vibrations from colliding grains. Frequency depends on grain size and speed. Larger grains create deeper tones, while smaller ones produce higher pitches. Composition matters too. The most musical sands are made primarily of quartz, a clear and durable mineral capable of sustaining vibrations without quickly damping them. Shape also plays a role. Rounded, polished grains sing clearly, while angular, freshly eroded grains create friction that muffles the sound. Moisture is the enemy. Even slight humidity binds grains together, preventing the free-flowing avalanches required for singing. This is why the phenomenon occurs in arid regions, and why the dunes' voices are strongest during the driest seasons. In the Sahara, they sing most beautifully during the harmattan, when dry interior winds sweep across the desert. Temperature plays its part as well. Heat creates gradients within the sand that can distort sound waves, like acoustic mirages. But when the desert cools in evening, the dunes' voices emerge with clarity. The mechanics of sound production reveal an elegant interplay of forces. An avalanche, triggered by wind or a traveler's step, sends grains cascading at rates of up to 100 collisions per second. Each tiny impact generates a vibration, inaudible on its own. Yet when millions synchronize, a phenomenon called phase locking occurs. Just as pendulum clocks align their swings or fireflies flash in unison, sand grains fall into rhythm, amplifying their collective voice. These synchronized vibrations generate pressure waves. Some ripple along the dune's surface, Rayleigh waves, producing the whistles and hums. Others, called P waves, travel through the dune's body, creating the deep, organ-like booms that can be felt as much as heard. The dune itself acts as a resonator, its size and shape determining which notes are amplified. Wind patterns further shape the performance. Steady breezes can sustain avalanches, producing notes that last for minutes. Gusts create staccato bursts, like harp strings plucked by an unseen hand. Scientists, fascinated by these natural instruments, have recorded and mapped dune sounds around the world. Each dune has its own distinct voice. The Kelso dunes often sing at around 450 Hz, producing a thrumming drone likened to a didgeridoo. In contrast, Saharan dunes can resonate as low as 70 Hz, their deep tones vibrating through the body as much as the ear. Some dunes sing a single pitch, while others create harmonies, chords, even overtones, sound so complex they rival the richness of human-made instruments. Their volume can astonish. A large avalanche on a tall dune may exceed 100 decibels, the roar of a motorcycle or rock concert, carrying for miles across the desert. For centuries, Bedouin tribes used these voices as natural beacons, guiding caravans through trackless landscapes. But dunes are temperamental performers. They sing only under perfect conditions: sand dry, air still, temperatures stable. Too much wind scatters grains, too little locks them in place. Like prima donnas, they perform only when the stage is just right. Seasons shape their music. In the American Southwest, summer and fall bring the clearest songs. In tropical deserts, the music rises during the dry season. In the cold deserts of Central Asia, brief summers create the fleeting conditions for sound. Human presence also influences the dunes' voices. A single step can spark a crescendo. Yet too much activity, tourism, vehicles, heavy foot traffic, mixes grain sizes and disrupts the delicate balance needed for song. Some once famous dunes have already fallen silent. Beyond wonder, this research has practical uses. Engineers apply lessons from sand acoustics to manage industrial flows, prevent construction site avalanches, and design systems for handling granular materials. Military studies have explored how desert acoustics affect communication and sound propagation. Even geologists benefit, using dune acoustics to analyze sand composition and origins. But the balance is fragile. Climate change alters rainfall and aridity, silencing some dunes while awakening others. Their songs are sensitive indicators of environmental change, natural instruments playing to the rhythm of shifting climates. The singing dunes remind us that Earth is full of hidden music, waiting for those who pause to listen. They challenge the notion of deserts as lifeless, revealing landscapes that hum with rhythm and resonate with melody. And as humanity looks toward other worlds, the voices of our desert dunes remind us that alien music may already exist, in the most unexpected places beneath our very feet. Deep beneath the surface of a singing dune, an intricate ballet of physics unfolds that would make even the most accomplished orchestra conductor pause in admiration. To truly understand how these massive formations create their haunting melodies, we must journey into the microscopic world of individual sand grains and examine the complex forces that govern their behavior. Picture, if you will, a single grain of sand resting on the slope of a great dune. This tiny fragment of quartz, no larger than a pinhead, has traveled thousands of miles to reach this spot. Born perhaps in the granite peaks of a distant mountain range, it was carved away by frost and rain, carried by streams to the sea, tumbled smooth by ocean waves, and finally blown inland by desert winds to find its place in this vast, sandy symphony. The grain's journey has given it precisely the right characteristics to participate in the dune's acoustic performance. Its edges have been rounded and polished until it resembles a tiny sphere, reducing the friction that would otherwise dampen sound transmission. Its composition of pure quartz gives it the crystalline structure needed to vibrate clearly at specific frequencies. Its size, typically between 0.1 and 0.5 millimeters in diameter, places it in the optimal range for acoustic resonance. When we examine singing sand under a powerful microscope, we discover that the individual grains are remarkably uniform. This uniformity, known to geologists as good sorting, is crucial to the singing phenomenon. Mixed sands, containing grains of many different sizes, cannot produce clear tones because the various grain sizes vibrate at different frequencies, creating a cacophony rather than harmony. But in the world's great singing dunes, millions of years of wind sorting have created collections of grains so similar in size that they function like a vast percussion ensemble, all playing in perfect time. The surface of each grain tells a story of its desert wanderings. Under extreme magnification, we can see the frosted texture created by countless grain-to-grain collisions during sandstorms. This frosting isn't merely cosmetic. It affects the acoustic properties of the grain by creating microscopic air pockets that help trap and resonate sound waves. Fresh sand with smooth, glassy surfaces doesn't sing as well as mature desert sand that has been seasoned by years of wind and weather. But individual grains, no matter how perfectly formed, cannot create the booming sounds that make singing dunes famous. The magic happens when millions of these grains begin to move together in coordinated avalanches. The physics of these avalanches reveals one of nature's most elegant examples of emergent behavior, the phenomenon where simple individual components combine to create complex collective behaviors that seem almost intelligent. When an avalanche begins, perhaps triggered by the wind or the footstep of a desert fox, the initial movement is chaotic. Random grains tumble down the slope, colliding with their neighbors in seemingly haphazard patterns. But as the avalanche grows and more grains join the cascade, something remarkable occurs. The individual collisions begin to synchronize, falling into a coordinated rhythm that transforms random noise into organized sound. This synchronization happens through a process called entrainment, the same mechanism that causes groups of crickets to chirp in unison or causes the neurons in our brains to fire in synchronized patterns. When grains of similar size and shape collide at similar speeds, their vibrations naturally fall into phase with each other. Small differences in timing are gradually eliminated as the grains adjust their movements to match their neighbors. The result is a phenomenon that physicists call constructive interference. Instead of the sound waves from individual grain collisions cancelling each other out, they reinforce and amplify each other, creating a collective voice that can be heard for miles across the desert. The frequency of this collective voice depends primarily on the collision rate of the grains, which in turn depends on their size, shape, and the speed of the avalanche. Modern research has revealed that singing dunes support multiple types of acoustic waves, each traveling through the sand mass in different ways. Surface waves, known as Rayleigh waves after the British physicist Lord Rayleigh, who first described them, travel along the surface of the dune like ripples on water. These waves are responsible for the higher-pitched sounds, the whistles and hums that give singing dunes their ethereal quality. Deeper within the dune structure, compressional waves called P waves travel through the entire sand mass. These waves, similar to those generated by earthquakes, create the deep, resonant booms that seem to emerge from the very heart of the earth. The dune acts as a massive waveguide, channeling and focusing these sound waves to create the characteristic acoustic signature of each singing sand formation. The relationship between wave speed and frequency in singing sands follows precise mathematical relationships that have been verified by researchers using sophisticated acoustic monitoring equipment. The speed of sound through dry sand depends on factors such as grain size, packing density, and the elastic properties of the individual grains. In typical singing sand, acoustic waves travel at speeds of several hundred meters per second, much slower than sound waves in air, but fast enough to coordinate the acoustic activity across large dune structures. Temperature plays a crucial role in the physics of sand songs. As the desert heats up during the day, thermal expansion causes the sand grains to separate slightly, reducing the coupling between them and damping the transmission of acoustic waves. This is why singing dunes are often quietest during the heat of the day, when thermal effects disrupt the delicate acoustic machinery. Conversely, as temperatures cool in the evening, the sand contracts and the grains pack more tightly together. This increased contact improves acoustic coupling and allows sound waves to travel more efficiently through the dune structure. The result is that many singing dunes reach their peak acoustic performance during the cool hours after sunset, when thermal gradients have stabilized and the sand has reached optimal density for sound transmission. Moisture is perhaps the greatest enemy of singing sands. Even tiny amounts of water can bind sand grains together through surface tension, preventing the free flow needed for avalanche formation. Water also acts as an acoustic damper, absorbing sound energy and preventing the buildup of the resonant vibrations that create clear tones. This is why singing dunes are found almost exclusively in arid regions, and why their voices fade during humid weather or after rare desert rains. The acoustic properties of different minerals also affect the quality of sand songs. Quartz, with its crystalline structure and high hardness, produces the clearest and most resonant tones. Feldspar, another common component of desert sands, is softer and tends to absorb rather than transmit acoustic energy. Carbonate sands, composed of shell fragments and coral debris, can sing but with a different tonal quality than pure quartz sands. Research conducted at institutions like Caltech and Cambridge University has used advanced techniques to map the internal structure of singing avalanches. High-speed cameras capture the motion of individual sand layers during acoustic events, revealing the complex flow patterns that generate sound. Laser interferometry measures the minute vibrations of the dune surface, showing how acoustic waves propagate through the sand mass. Seismometers detect the subsurface waves that create the deep, resonant tones characteristic of the largest dunes. These studies have revealed that singing dunes operate as natural musical instruments, with the dune shape acting as a resonating chamber that amplifies certain frequencies while suppressing others. The slope angle of the dune affects which frequencies are most strongly amplified, explaining why different dunes have characteristic pitch ranges. Steep dunes with sharp ridges tend to produce deeper tones, while gentler slopes favor higher frequencies. The internal structure of the dune also plays a role in its acoustic properties. Layers of sand with different grain sizes or packing densities can act as acoustic interfaces, reflecting and refracting sound waves in complex patterns. These internal structures, invisible from the surface, give each dune its unique acoustic fingerprint. Wind patterns add another layer of complexity to the physics of sand songs. Steady winds can sustain avalanches for extended periods, maintaining the conditions needed for continuous sound production. But wind also affects the coupling between the dune surface and the surrounding air, influencing how efficiently acoustic energy is transmitted from the sand to the atmosphere. The phenomenon of acoustic levitation, where small particles can be suspended in air by intense sound waves, may play a role in some singing sand formations. High-intensity acoustic waves generated by large avalanches can temporarily lift small sand grains off the dune surface, creating a thin layer of airborne particles that may contribute to the acoustic properties of the system. Modern computational models now attempt to simulate the complex physics of singing dunes using sophisticated algorithms that track the motion and interactions of millions of individual sand grains. These simulations help researchers understand how changes in grain properties, environmental conditions, and dune geometry affect acoustic output. Such models are crucial for predicting how climate change and human activities might affect the world's remaining singing dunes. The study of singing sand acoustics has also contributed to our understanding of granular materials in general. Industries that handle sand, grain, and other particulate materials have benefited from research into how particle flows can generate sound and vibration. This knowledge helps in designing quieter industrial processes and more efficient systems for transporting granular materials. In the year 1271, a young Venetian merchant named Marco Polo embarked on a journey that would change not only his life, but also Europe's understanding of the vast world beyond the Mediterranean Sea. As part of his father's trading expedition along the legendary Silk Road, the 17-year-old Marco would encounter wonders that stretched the boundaries of medieval imagination, exotic spices, magnificent cities, and customs so foreign they seemed drawn from fairy tales. But perhaps no encounter was as mysterious and haunting as his passage through the singing deserts of Central Asia. The Polo expedition's route took them through some of the world's most formidable landscapes. After traveling through Persia and Afghanistan, they entered the vast desert regions that would test their endurance and challenge their understanding of the natural world. It was here, in what we now know as the Bardan-Jaran Desert and the surrounding sand seas of the Gobi, that Marco Polo first heard the voices that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. Picture young Marco, wrapped in the furs and heavy robes necessary for desert travel, riding his camel through a landscape that must have seemed utterly alien to someone raised in the canal-crossed city of Venice. The endless expanse of sand dunes stretched in all directions, their surfaces sculpted by wind into shapes that shifted and changed with each passing storm. During the day, the sun beat down mercilessly, turning the sand into a furnace that could cook meat and blind the unwary. But it was during the cool desert nights that the true mystery revealed itself. As recorded in his famous travelogue, Il Milione, Marco Polo described hearing sounds in the desert that filled him with wonder and terror. He wrote of voices calling out in the darkness, sometimes seeming to come from travelers who had become separated from the caravan, sometimes sounding like the clash of weapons or the beating of drums. The sounds were so realistic that members of the expedition would often leave the safety of the group to investigate, only to find nothing but empty sand and starlit silence. Polo's description of these phenomena reveals both his amazement and his attempt to rationalize what he was experiencing within the world-view of his time. To a medieval European, the desert was already a place of mystery and danger, home to jinn and demons, spirits and supernatural forces that could lead travelers astray or drive them mad with thirst and isolation. The sounds he heard seemed to confirm these beliefs, providing tangible evidence of the supernatural inhabitants of the wasteland. Sometimes you hear the sounds of a great company of people coming, with instruments of music, and you hear the beat of drums and the clash of weapons. Polo wrote, "Then you hear voices calling you by name, voices of people you know, urging you to leave the caravan and come to them. Many travelers have been lost this way, following phantom voices into the empty desert, where they perish of thirst and exposure." The medieval understanding of acoustics was primitive by modern standards. Sound was thought to be carried by invisible spirits or emanations that could be influenced by supernatural forces. The idea that sand itself could generate music through purely physical processes would have been incomprehensible to 13th century minds. Instead, Polo and his contemporaries interpreted the desert's voices as evidence of a spirit world that intersected with the physical realm in these remote and desolate places. The timing of Polo's journey was significant for another reason. He was traveling during what climatologists now recognize as the medieval warm period, a time when global temperatures were slightly higher than today. This warming may have created even more arid conditions in the Central Asian deserts, making the sand drier and more acoustically active than it might be in cooler periods. The increased aridity would have created ideal conditions for the singing sand phenomenon, making Polo's encounters with desert music particularly intense and memorable. Polo's account describes not just single voices or simple sounds, but complex acoustic events that seemed to involve entire phantom orchestras. He wrote of hearing all kinds of musical instruments and also of drums and the clash of arms, suggesting that the desert was producing a full range of tones and frequencies. This matches what modern researchers have discovered about the most active singing dunes, which can indeed generate complex harmonic structures that include both high-frequency whistles and low-frequency booms. The psychological impact of these sounds on medieval travelers cannot be overstated. Imagine the effect on men who had already been traveling for months through some of the world's most challenging terrain, their nerves frayed by the constant dangers of bandits, storms, and the ever-present threat of becoming lost in the vast emptiness. The sudden appearance of phantom voice and mysterious music would have seemed like clear evidence that they had entered a realm where the normal laws of nature no longer applied. Polo's description of voices calling you by name is particularly intriguing from a modern perspective. While we now understand that singing dunes cannot actually produce articulate speech, the human brain is remarkably adept at finding patterns and meaning in random sounds. The acoustic phenomenon known as pareidolia causes us to hear familiar voices and words in background noise, wind sounds, and other ambiguous audio signals. Desert travelers, already stressed and possibly suffering from mild dehydration, would be particularly susceptible to this psychological effect. The medieval caravan routes through Central Asia were well established by Polo's time, having been used by traders for centuries before his arrival. Chinese records from the Tang dynasty describe similar acoustic phenomena in the same desert regions, suggesting that the singing sands had been active for many generations. Buddhist pilgrims traveling the same routes between China and India also reported supernatural sounds in the desert, which they interpreted through the lens of their own religious beliefs as the voices of protective spirits or warning demons. Polo's journey took place during the reign of Kublai Khan, the Mongol emperor who ruled over the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The Mongols themselves had extensive experience with desert travel, having originated from the steppes and desert margins of Mongolia. Mongol guides and interpreters traveling with the Polo expedition would have had their own explanations for the desert's voices, drawn from the shamanic traditions of Central Asia. In Mongol cosmology, the natural world was inhabited by a vast array of spirits that could influence human affairs. Mountains, rivers, forests, and deserts all had their own spiritual guardians that could be benevolent or hostile depending on how travelers treated their domains. The sounds of singing dunes would have been interpreted as communications from these desert spirits, messages that required careful attention and appropriate rituals to ensure safe passage. The technological limitations of Polo's era meant that he had no way to record or analyze the sounds he was hearing. Without instruments to measure frequency, amplitude, or duration, his descriptions rely entirely on subjective impressions and comparisons to familiar sounds from his European experience. This has led some modern scholars to question whether Polo actually heard singing dunes at all, or whether his accounts were exaggerated or fabricated to make his story more compelling to European audiences hungry for tales of exotic wonders. However, careful analysis of Polo's route and the locations he describes suggests that he did indeed pass through several areas known today for active singing dunes. The Baden Jaran Desert, in particular, contains some of the world's most acoustically active sand formations, including dunes that can produce sounds audible for miles across the desert landscape. The seasonal timing of Polo's journey, during the dry months when desert sands are most likely to sing, also supports the authenticity of his accounts. The cultural transmission of Polo's story also influenced how subsequent European explorers interpreted similar phenomena. For centuries after the publication of Il Milione, European accounts of desert travel frequently mentioned mysterious voices and phantom sounds, often using language clearly derived from Polo's original descriptions. This created a kind of literary tradition that may have influenced how travelers perceived and reported acoustic phenomena in desert environments. Islamic scholars and travelers from the same period provide interesting counterpoints to Polo's supernatural interpretation of desert sounds. Arab geographers like al-Idrisi and Ibn Battuta, writing from within Islamic intellectual traditions that emphasized careful observation and rational analysis, described similar acoustic phenomena, but tended to focus more on the physical characteristics of the sounds rather than their supernatural implications. The preservation of Polo's accounts in multiple manuscripts and languages has allowed modern historians to trace how the story of desert voices evolved over time. Different versions of the text show variations in how the phenomena are described, with some manuscripts emphasizing the supernatural aspects, while others focus more on practical warnings about the dangers of becoming separated from caravans. Archaeological evidence from the Silk Road period has also shed light on the practical aspects of desert travel that would have influenced Polo's experiences. Excavations of caravanserai and way stations along the major trade routes reveal the sophisticated logistics required to maintain regular commercial traffic across the Central Asian deserts. The discovery of water storage systems, fodder supplies, and navigation aids helps us understand how medieval travelers managed the challenges of desert crossing and why acoustic phenomena would have been particularly significant as potential navigation hazards or landmarks. The Sahara Desert, that vast ocean of sand stretching across North Africa like a golden sea frozen in time, holds within its endless expanse some of Earth's most magnificent singing dunes. Here, where the sun beats down with an intensity that can overwhelm the senses and the horizon shimmers with heat, mirages that blur the line between earth and sky. The ancient sands have been performing their acoustic symphony for millions of years. Let's journey together to the heart of this desert continent, where the morning light paints the dunes in shades of amber and gold, and the silence is so profound it seems to have weight and substance. The Sahara's singing dunes are scattered across this immense landscape, like musical instruments waiting for the wind to play them, each one unique in its voice and character, shaped by the particular conditions of its environment. In the western reaches of the Sahara, near the Atlantic coast of Morocco, the great erg formations rise like cathedral spires from the desert floor. These massive sand seas, known locally as ergs, contain some of the most acoustically active dunes on the African continent. The Erg Chebi, near the town of Merzouga, is perhaps the most famous of these singing formations. Rising over 500 feet above the surrounding landscape, its steep faces catch the desert winds and channel them into acoustic performances that have amazed travelers for centuries. The sand of Erg Chebi tells a story written in geology and time. These grains began their journey in the Atlas Mountains, carved from ancient rocks by millennia of weathering and erosion. Rivers carried them toward the coast, where they were sorted and polished by ocean waves before being blown inland by the trade winds to accumulate in the massive dune fields we see today. This long journey has given the sand grains the perfect characteristics for acoustic activity. They are well-rounded, uniform in size, and composed primarily of pure quartz that resonates clearly at specific frequencies. The acoustic signature of Erg Chebi is distinctive, characterized by deep, resonant tones that seem to emerge from the very heart of the earth. Local Berber guides speak of the dunes singing the old songs, melodies that carry the memory of ancient times when the Sahara was green and lush, home to rivers and forests that vanished as the climate changed. These songs, they say, can be heard most clearly during the cool hours before dawn, when the desert is still and the thermal gradients have stabilized. Moving eastward across the Sahara, we encounter the great sand seas of Algeria, where the singing dunes take on different characteristics influenced by local geology and climate patterns. The Grand Erg Oriental, a vast field of sand dunes covering over 192,000 square miles, contains numerous singing formations that produce a range of acoustic phenomena, from gentle humming to thunderous booms that can be heard for miles across the desert. The seasonal patterns of dune singing in the Sahara are closely tied to the region's climate cycles. During the Harmattan season, when dry winds blow from the interior toward the coast, the humidity drops to extremely low levels, creating ideal conditions for acoustic activity. The sand becomes so dry that individual grains flow like water, cascading down dune faces in avalanches that generate the coordinated vibrations necessary for clear sound production. But the Sahara's singing dunes are not merely acoustic curiosities. They play important roles in the desert ecosystem and in the lives of the people who call this harsh environment home. Tuareg nomads, those legendary blue people of the desert, whose indigo robes give them their nickname, have long used the voices of singing dunes as navigation aids and weather predictors. The direction and intensity of dune songs can indicate wind patterns and approaching storms, valuable information for people whose survival depends on reading the subtle signs of desert weather. The Tuareg have developed a rich oral tradition around the singing dunes, with stories and songs that mirror the acoustic patterns of the dunes themselves. Their music often incorporates rhythms and tonal structures that echo the natural music of the desert, creating a cultural dialogue between human creativity and natural phenomenon. During traditional gatherings around desert campfires, Tuareg musicians will sometimes synchronize their performances with the distant voices of singing dunes, creating haunting harmonies that blend human and natural music into something transcendent. The acoustic properties of Saharan singing dunes have been studied extensively by researchers seeking to understand how these massive formations generate and propagate sound. The extreme aridity of the Saharan environment creates some of the world's most active singing sands, with moisture levels so low that grain-to-grain bonding is minimized and acoustic coupling is optimized. During the driest periods, Saharan dunes can produce sounds exceeding 100 decibels in volume, creating acoustic events that can be detected by seismographic equipment hundreds of miles away. The unique geology of the Sahara also contributes to the distinctive character of its singing dunes. Unlike desert formations in other parts of the world that are composed primarily of quartz sand, many Saharan dunes contain significant amounts of other minerals, including feldspar, mica, and even fragments of ancient coral reefs from when the region was covered by prehistoric seas. This mineral diversity creates complex acoustic signatures, with different minerals contributing different tonal qualities to the overall sound. In the Central Sahara, around the Tibesti Mountains of Chad and Libya, singing dunes interact with the rocky landscape in fascinating ways. Here, the acoustic waves generated by dune avalanches reflect off cliff faces and canyon walls, creating echo effects and acoustic focusing that can concentrate sound into narrow beams. Local legends speak of voice canyons, where the songs of distant dunes are captured and amplified, creating natural amphitheaters where travelers can hear desert music with startling clarity. The cultural significance of singing dunes in Saharan societies extends far beyond mere navigation aids. Among the Wadabe people of Niger, the voices of the dunes are incorporated into traditional fertility rituals. Young men seeking to attract brides will sometimes camp near singing dunes during the dry season, believing that exposure to the desert's music will enhance their own vocal abilities and make them more attractive to potential partners. Ancient trade routes across the Sahara often followed paths that connected singing dunes, using them as acoustic landmarks that could guide caravans even when visibility was reduced by sandstorms. The trans-Saharan salt trade, which connected sub-Saharan Africa with Mediterranean markets for over 1,000 years, relied heavily on these natural navigation aids. Merchants would time their journeys to coincide with periods of peak dune activity, when the desert's voices were strongest and most reliable. Archaeological evidence from abandoned caravan stops and trading posts reveals the importance of singing dunes in ancient Saharan commerce. Inscriptions and petroglyphs near major dune fields often include symbols that researchers believe represent acoustic phenomena, suggesting that ancient travelers developed sophisticated methods for recording and communicating information about dune singing patterns. The Sahara's singing dunes also play a role in the desert's hydrological systems, though this connection is subtle and often overlooked. The acoustic waves generated by large dunes can sometimes trigger the release of trapped groundwater, causing temporary springs to appear in areas that are normally bone dry. This phenomenon, known locally as singing springs, has been documented by hydrogeologists studying the complex relationship between surface sand dynamics and underground water systems. Modern satellite imagery has revealed the true scale of acoustic activity in the Saharan desert. Time-lapse photography shows the migration patterns of singing dunes as they move across the landscape under the influence of prevailing winds. Some dunes travel several miles per year, carrying their acoustic signatures to new locations and creating shifting patterns of sound that change the desert's musical landscape over time. The impact of climate change on Saharan singing dunes is becoming increasingly apparent to researchers monitoring these formations. Rising global temperatures are intensifying the aridity of the region, which might seem beneficial for dune singing since drier conditions generally enhance acoustic activity. However, increased temperatures also create stronger thermal gradients within the sand masses, which can disrupt the coordinated grain movements necessary for clear sound production. Changes in wind patterns associated with global climate shifts are also affecting the Sahara's singing dunes. The strength and consistency of trade winds that have shaped these formations for millennia are beginning to change, altering both the physical structure of the dunes and their acoustic properties. Some traditionally active singing sites have become quieter in recent years, while others have begun singing for the first time in recorded history. The preservation of Saharan singing dunes faces challenges from both natural and human sources. Increasing tourism to desert regions has led to greater foot traffic on some dune faces, disturbing the delicate surface layers necessary for acoustic activity. Off-road vehicle use can be particularly damaging, mixing sand layers and destroying the uniform grain sorting that develops over thousands of years. Sand mining operations, though still relatively limited in the Sahara, pose another threat to singing dune formations. The same properties that make certain sands acoustically active, uniform grain size, high quartz content, and good rounding, also make them valuable for industrial applications, including glass manufacturing and construction. Several formerly active singing sites have been partially or completely destroyed by mining operations. Conservation efforts for Saharan singing dunes face unique challenges due to the remote locations and international boundaries involved. Many of the most significant formations are located in regions affected by political instability, making scientific research and protection efforts difficult to implement. International cooperation between North African nations has been essential for developing conservation strategies that can protect these acoustic treasures for future generations. Research into Saharan singing dunes continues to yield new discoveries about both the physics of sound generation and the cultural significance of these formations. Advanced acoustic monitoring equipment deployed at remote desert sites is providing unprecedented detail about the complex wave patterns generated by dune avalanches. This research is contributing to our understanding of granular physics and has applications in industries ranging from pharmaceutical manufacturing to space exploration. The songs of the Sahara's dunes carry within them the deep history of our planet. The story of ancient seas that dried up, of mountains that wore away grain by grain, of winds that sorted and shaped and sculpted the very landscape itself. In their haunting voices, we hear echoes of the geological forces that continue to reshape our world, reminders that even the most apparently lifeless landscapes are alive with movement and music, waiting for those with the patience and sensitivity to listen. In the remote reaches of Inner Mongolia, where the vast steppes give way to one of the world's most extraordinary desert landscapes, stand the tallest singing sand dunes on Earth. The Badain-Jaran Desert, whose name means mysterious lakes in the Mongolian language, is home to megadunes that rise over 1,600 feet above the surrounding landscape. Sand mountains so massive they create their own weather patterns and harbor permanent lakes in the valleys between their towering peaks. Let's journey together to this remarkable corner of China, where the singing sands have been performing their ancient concerts for millennia, witnessed by Mongol herders, Silk Road traders, and the occasional modern researcher brave enough to venture into this remote wilderness. The Badain-Jaran is not merely a desert. It's a landscape that challenges our understanding of what sand can accomplish when given enough time and the right conditions to accumulate and organize itself into structures of breathtaking scale and beauty. The formation of these giant singing dunes represents one of geology's most impressive achievements. Over millions of years, winds from the Gobi Desert have carried sand grains westward, depositing them in the basin that now holds the Badain-Jaran. But unlike typical desert formations where sand spreads out in relatively flat sheets, the unique topography and wind patterns here have created conditions that allow sand to accumulate vertically, building dunes of almost mountain-like proportions. The tallest of these formations, known locally as Bailutu Peak, rises 1,611 feet above sea level, making it taller than the Empire State Building. But its true height is even more impressive when measured from its base in the surrounding valley, where it towers nearly 1,000 feet above the desert floor. Standing at the base of such a formation and looking up at its wind-sculpted peak, disappearing into the desert sky, one gains a visceral understanding of the immense forces that shape our planet's surface. These megadunes possess acoustic properties unlike any other singing sands on Earth. Their massive size allows them to generate extremely low-frequency sounds, deep bass notes that travel through the ground as much as through the air. Local Mongol herders speak of feeling the dunes as songs through the soles of their feet, vibrations that seem to connect directly with the heartbeat of the Earth itself. The acoustic signature of the Badain-Jaran dunes is characterized by frequencies as low as 31.5 Hz, well below the range of normal human hearing. These infrasonic waves can travel for hundreds of miles through the solid rock beneath the desert, creating a communication network that spans the entire dune field. Some researchers speculate that the dunes may be acoustically coupled, with avalanches on one formation triggering sympathetic responses in distant dunes through these subsurface wave transmissions. The seasonal cycle of dune singing in the Badain-Jaran follows the rhythms of Central Asia's extreme continental climate. During the harsh winter months, when temperatures can drop to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, the sand becomes locked in place by frost and occasional snow cover, and the dunes fall silent. But as spring arrives and the desert begins to warm, the sand loosens, and the first tentative songs begin to emerge. Summer is the peak season for acoustic activity in the Badain-Jaran. The intense heat of the continental climate, combined with extremely low humidity levels, creates ideal conditions for sand avalanches. During the hottest months, the surface temperature of the dunes can exceed 150 degrees Fahrenheit, creating powerful convection currents that help trigger the massive sand movements necessary for the deepest, most resonant tones. The unique geography of the Badain-Jaran has created a complex acoustic environment where multiple dunes can sing simultaneously, creating harmonies and rhythmic patterns that seem almost composed. Researchers using sensitive microphone arrays have recorded what they describe as desert symphonies, coordinated acoustic performances, involving dozens of separate dune formations, each contributing its own voice to a collective musical experience. The cultural significance of these singing giants in Chinese history cannot be overstated. Ancient Chinese texts from the Han Dynasty describe thunder mountains in the western deserts that would boom and rumble without apparent cause. These accounts, dating back over 2,000 years, provide some of the earliest written descriptions of singing dune phenomena, predating European accounts by more than a millennium. Buddhist pilgrims traveling between China and India along the Silk Road routes wrote detailed accounts of the acoustic phenomena they encountered in the Badain-Jaran region. One particularly vivid description from the Tang dynasty tells of a monk who spent 3 days camped near a massive singing dune, recording in his journal that the sand mountain speaks with the voice of 10,000 dragons, telling stories of times before memory. The establishment of the Silk Road trade networks brought increased traffic through the Badain-Jaran region, and the singing dunes became important landmarks for navigation across the otherwise featureless desert landscape. Chinese maps from the Yuan dynasty show the locations of major singing dunes marked with special symbols, and trade records indicate that caravan masters would time their journeys to take advantage of periods when the dunes were most acoustically active, using their songs as both navigation aids and entertainment during the long desert crossings. Modern scientific study of the Badain-Jaran's singing dunes began in earnest during the 1960s, when Chinese geologists first began to systematically explore this remote region. What they discovered challenged existing theories about sand dune formation and behavior. The megadunes of the Badain-Jaran were found to be remarkably stable formations, their bases anchored by groundwater and their peaks shaped by consistent wind patterns that have remained unchanged for thousands of years. This stability has allowed the dunes to develop exceptionally sophisticated acoustic systems. Unlike smaller, migrating dunes that must constantly rebuild their acoustic properties as they move across the landscape, the Badain-Jaran giants have had millennia to fine-tune their resonant characteristics. The result is a level of acoustic complexity and clarity that surpasses that of singing dunes anywhere else in the world. The internal structure of these massive formations reveals layer upon layer of differently aged sand, like the rings of a tree recording years of growth. Core samples taken from the depths of the largest dunes show sand layers dating back tens of thousands of years, each layer preserving information about the climate conditions that existed when it was deposited. Some layers show evidence of much wetter periods, when occasional rains would have dampened the sand and interrupted the acoustic cycles. The presence of permanent lakes within the Badain-Jaran dune field adds another layer of complexity to the acoustic environment. These lakes, fed by groundwater springs that well up between the massive dune formations, create zones of higher humidity that can affect sound propagation in the surrounding area. The interaction between dry, acoustically active dune faces and the humid microclimates around the lakes creates acoustic gradients that can focus and channel sound waves in unexpected ways. Water from these lakes also supports small oases of vegetation that provide habitat for a surprising variety of desert wildlife. Birds nesting in these oases have been observed timing their songs to coincide with periods of dune acoustic activity, creating natural choruses that blend avian melodies with the deeper tones of the singing sand. Some researchers believe that certain desert bird species may have evolved to use dune songs as territorial markers or mating signals. The extreme remoteness of the Badain Jaran has helped preserve its acoustic environment from the disturbances that have affected singing dunes in more accessible locations. The nearest major city is hundreds of miles away, and the harsh climate and difficult terrain have limited tourism and development in the region. This isolation has made the Badain Jaran a natural laboratory for studying singing sand phenomena under pristine conditions. Recent advances in satellite technology have allowed researchers to monitor the Badain Jaran dunes from space, tracking changes in their shape and position over time. These studies have revealed that while the megadunes are remarkably stable compared to smaller formations, they do undergo slow, cyclical changes in response to long-term climate variations. During periods of increased wind activity, the dunes grow taller and more acoustically active. During calmer periods, they become more stable but less musically productive. Climate change is beginning to affect the Badain Jaran region, though the impacts are subtle and complex. Rising temperatures might be expected to increase acoustic activity by making the sand drier, but changes in precipitation patterns and wind systems may have countervailing effects. Some monitoring stations have recorded slight changes in the frequency signatures of certain dunes, possibly reflecting alterations in grain size distribution caused by changing erosion and deposition patterns. The Chinese government has recognized the scientific and cultural importance of the Badain Jaran's singing dunes by designating the region as a UNESCO Global Geopark. This protected status helps ensure that future generations will be able to experience the awe-inspiring acoustic performances of these desert giants. Research facilities established within the geopark are advancing our understanding of granular physics and acoustic phenomena while training new generations of desert scientists. The songs of China's whispering giants carry messages from deep time, voices of ancient winds and long-vanished seas, stories of patience and persistence written in the language of sand and sound. In their deep, resonant tones, we hear the pulse of geological time itself, a reminder that our planet is constantly changing, constantly singing, constantly creating new wonders for those with the patience to listen and the wisdom to preserve them for the future. Along the southwestern coast of Africa, where the cold Atlantic Ocean meets one of the world's most ancient deserts, lies a landscape that seems to exist at the very edge of possibility. The Namib Desert, stretching along Namibia's coastline like a ribbon of gold and amber, is considered the oldest desert on Earth, a place where sand dunes have been singing their ancient songs for over 80 million years, since the time when dinosaurs still walked the Earth. Let's travel together to this extraordinary corner of our planet, where the desert meets the sea in a collision of elements that creates some of the most dramatic and acoustically remarkable landscapes imaginable. Here, massive sand dunes rise directly from the ocean's edge, their faces shaped by winds that have blown across thousands of miles of open water before reaching the African coast. The result is a desert unlike any other, where the songs of the sand are accompanied by the constant rhythm of ocean waves and the cries of seabirds wheeling overhead. The most famous of Namibia's singing dunes is found at Sossusvlei, a salt and clay pan surrounded by towering red sand dunes that reach heights of over 1,000 feet. These dunes, sculpted by millions of years of wind and weather, glow like enormous rubies in the desert light, their surfaces rippled with patterns that shift and change with each passing breeze. But it's not just their visual beauty that makes these formations remarkable. It's their extraordinary acoustic properties that have earned them recognition as some of the world's most accomplished natural musicians. The sand that forms Namibia's singing dunes tells a story that spans geological ages. Much of it originated in the interior of the African continent, carried westward by ancient rivers that once flowed through landscapes now buried beneath later deposits. Ocean currents then transported these sand grains along the coast, sorting and polishing them until they achieved the uniform size and shape necessary for acoustic activity. The result is sand that possesses nearly perfect characteristics for sound production. Grains so well-rounded and uniform that they flow like liquid when disturbed. The distinctive red color of Namibian dune sand comes from iron oxide coatings on individual quartz grains, the result of slow oxidation processes that occur over millions of years in the desert environment. This iron coating doesn't just give the sand its beautiful color, it also affects its acoustic properties, creating a slightly different tonal quality than the clear quartz sands found in other singing dune locations. The result is a warmer, richer sound that has been compared to the voice of a cello or the low notes of a pipe organ. The coastal location of the Namib Desert creates unique acoustic conditions not found in inland desert regions. The proximity of the ocean generates temperature gradients and humidity variations that affect how sound waves propagate through the desert air. During the early morning hours, when cool ocean air moves inland and meets the warming desert surface, acoustic focusing effects can occur that make dune songs audible from much greater distances than would normally be possible. Sea fog, a common phenomenon along the Namibian coast, plays a complex role in the acoustic behavior of the coastal dunes. While fog generally suppresses dune singing by adding moisture to the sand surface, the specific characteristics of Namibian sea fog, which tends to be shallow and short-lived, can sometimes create ideal acoustic conditions. As the fog lifts and the surface sand rapidly dries, it can trigger spectacular acoustic events as millions of sand grains simultaneously begin to flow and resonate. The interaction between ocean tides and desert acoustics creates daily rhythms in the singing patterns of Namibian dunes. The gravitational forces that drive ocean tides also create subtle variations in atmospheric pressure that can influence the behavior of sand grains on dune surfaces. Some researchers have documented correlations between tidal cycles and periods of peak acoustic activity, suggesting that the moon's influence extends even into the heart of the desert. Wildlife in the Namib has evolved remarkable adaptations to both the extreme desert conditions and the acoustic environment created by singing dunes. Desert elephants, which traverse the coastal desert in search of water and food, have been observed using dune songs as navigation aids, following acoustic landmarks to locate underground water sources. These elephants possess extraordinary hearing abilities that allow them to detect infrasonic communications from other elephant groups across vast distances, and they appear to be equally sensitive to the low-frequency sounds produced by singing dunes. The Namib's most famous resident, the desert-adapted beetle Stenochara gracilipes, has developed a unique relationship with the acoustic environment of the dunes. These beetles, which survive by collecting water from fog droplets on their backs, seem to time their surface activities to coincide with periods of dune acoustic activity. Some researchers speculate that the vibrations produced by singing sand may help the beetles detect the approach of fog banks, giving them advance warning to prepare their water collection systems. Gemsbok, the magnificent antelope species that has become synonymous with the Namib Desert, demonstrates sophisticated responses to dune acoustic activity. These animals, which can survive without drinking water by extracting moisture from their food, use the sounds of singing dunes to locate areas where sand movement indicates the presence of buried vegetation. The acoustic signatures of different types of sand movement can indicate whether buried plant material is likely to be found beneath the surface. The cultural significance of Namibia's singing dunes extends back to the earliest human inhabitants of the region. The Nama people, whose ancestors have lived in the Namib for thousands of years, have developed rich oral traditions around the voices of the desert. Traditional stories tell of sand spirits that sing to guide travelers to water sources, or to warn them away from dangerous areas where sandstorms are likely to occur. Archaeological evidence from ancient settlements in the Namib reveals that early inhabitants incorporated acoustic considerations into their choice of dwelling sites. Many ancient camps and seasonal settlements are located in positions where they would have been acoustically shielded from the loudest dune songs, while still being close enough to use the sounds as environmental indicators. Rock art found in the region includes symbols that some researchers believe represent acoustic phenomena, suggesting that ancient peoples developed sophisticated methods for recording and communicating information about desert sound patterns. European exploration of the Namib began in the late 15th century, when Portuguese navigators sailing along the African coast reported hearing mysterious sounds coming from the desert interior. Early colonial accounts describe thunder mountains and singing sands that both fascinated and frightened European visitors. These early explorers, lacking any scientific framework for understanding acoustic phenomena in desert environments, often attributed the sounds to supernatural causes. The German colonial period in Namibia brought the first systematic attempts to study the desert's acoustic properties. German geologists and naturalists documented numerous examples of singing dune phenomena, though their explanations remained largely speculative. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that researchers began to develop scientific theories about the physical mechanisms responsible for dune singing. Modern research in the Namib has benefited from the desert's accessibility and the relatively stable political conditions in Namibia. The establishment of the Namib-Naukluft National Park has provided protection for many of the region's most important singing dune formations, while allowing continued scientific research. Long-term monitoring stations throughout the park collect data on acoustic activity, weather conditions, and dune morphology changes. One of the most significant discoveries from Namib research has been the identification of acoustic coupling between different dune formations. Using arrays of sensitive microphones, researchers have documented instances where avalanches on one dune trigger sympathetic acoustic responses in neighboring formations. This coupling appears to occur through both airborne sound waves and ground-transmitted vibrations, creating complex acoustic interactions across entire dune fields. The extreme age of the Namib Desert has allowed its singing dunes to develop exceptionally stable acoustic characteristics. Unlike younger desert formations that are still evolving their acoustic properties, the Namib's dunes represent mature acoustic systems that have been refined over millions of years. This maturity is reflected in the clarity and consistency of their sound production, which surpasses that of many other singing dune locations. Climate change impacts on the Namib's singing dunes are being closely monitored by international research teams. The desert's coastal location makes it particularly sensitive to changes in ocean temperature and current patterns associated with global warming. Alterations in sea surface temperatures affect the formation and movement of coastal fog, which in turn influences the moisture content and acoustic properties of the dunes. Rising sea levels present another potential threat to Namibia's coastal singing dunes. While current projections suggest that significant impacts are still decades away, researchers are already documenting subtle changes in groundwater levels and salt content in near coastal dune formations. These changes could eventually affect the stability and acoustic properties of some of the world's most remarkable singing sand formations. Tourism to Namibia's singing dunes has grown dramatically in recent decades, bringing both opportunities and challenges for conservation. The visual spectacle of massive red dunes against blue skies has made Sossusvlei one of Africa's most photographed landscapes, but increased foot traffic poses risks to the delicate surface layers necessary for acoustic activity. Park management has implemented careful visitor guidelines to minimize impacts while still allowing people to experience the wonder of hearing desert songs. The songs of Namibia's ancient dunes carry within them the deep memory of our planet's longest continuous desert, voices that have been singing since before flowers bloomed on Earth, since before grass covered the savanna. In their warm, rich tones, we hear the patience of geological time, the persistence of wind and weather, and the enduring beauty of landscapes that have learned to thrive in conditions that challenge the very definition of habitability. In the vastness of the American Southwest, where ancient mountains rise like islands from seas of desert scrub, and the sky stretches unbroken from horizon to horizon, hide some of North America's most remarkable acoustic treasures. These are singing dunes that most Americans don't even know exist, hidden gems scattered across the desert landscapes of California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, each with its own unique voice and story to tell. Let's begin our exploration at perhaps the most famous of America's singing dunes, the Kelso Dunes of California's Mojave Desert. Rising like a golden pyramid from the desert floor, this formation represents the largest field of aeolian sand deposits in the Mojave, covering over 45 square miles, with dunes that reach heights of nearly 700 feet. But it's not just their size that makes the Kelso Dunes remarkable, it's their voice, a deep, resonant boom that has earned them the nickname the Booming Dunes. The Kelso Dunes' acoustic signature is unmistakable. When conditions are right, when the sand is dry and the air is still, avalanches down the dune faces produce sounds that have been compared to low-flying aircraft, distant thunder, or the bass notes of a massive pipe organ. The frequency typically ranges around 450 Hz, creating a sound so deep and powerful that it can be felt as much as heard, vibrating through the ground and into the bodies of amazed visitors. The sand that forms the Kelso Dunes tells a story of incredible journeys across geological time. Much of it originated in the Mojave River system, carried downstream from the erosion of granite mountains and deposited in ancient lake beds. Over thousands of years, prevailing winds lifted this sand and transported it across the desert, sorting and polishing the grains until they achieved the perfect size and shape for acoustic activity. The result is sand composed primarily of clear quartz crystals, each grain rounded and uniform, ideally suited for the coordinated avalanches that create the dune's famous voice. What makes the Kelso Dunes particularly interesting to researchers is their isolation from other major sand sources. Unlike many singing dunes that are part of larger sand seas or desert systems, Kelso stands alone in the Mojave landscape, a solitary island of sand surrounded by rocky desert terrain. This isolation has allowed scientists to study the dune system as a closed acoustic environment, providing insights into how sand particles organize themselves into sound-producing systems. The seasonal patterns of acoustic activity at Kelso Dunes follow the rhythms of desert weather. During the winter months, occasional rains and higher humidity levels can dampen the sand and reduce acoustic activity. But as spring arrives and the desert begins its annual cycle of heating and drying, the dunes begin to find their voice again. Summer and early fall represent peak singing seasons, when the combination of extreme dryness and thermal activity creates ideal conditions for spectacular acoustic displays. Moving north into Nevada, we encounter another remarkable singing dune formation at Sand Mountain, near the town of Fallon. This 600-foot-tall dune, rising from the Carson Desert like a monument to the power of wind and time, produces sounds that are distinctly different from those of the Kelso dunes. Where Kelso booms with deep, organ-like tones, Sand Mountain tends toward higher frequencies, creating sounds that have been described as whistling, humming, or even singing in the traditional sense. The difference in acoustic character between these two American dunes illustrates how local conditions can dramatically affect the voice of singing sand. Sand Mountain's grains are slightly smaller on average than those at Kelso, and they contain a higher proportion of volcanic minerals derived from the surrounding Nevada landscape. These differences in composition and grain size create different resonant frequencies, giving each dune its own unique acoustic fingerprint. Sand Mountain has become a popular destination for off-road vehicle enthusiasts, a use that has created both opportunities and challenges for studying its acoustic properties. On one hand, the regular disturbance of the dune surface by recreational vehicles creates frequent avalanches that provide opportunities to observe and record acoustic phenomena. On the other hand, the mixing of sand layers and the introduction of foreign materials from vehicle traffic can disrupt the natural sorting processes that are essential for clear sound production. The management challenges at Sand Mountain reflect a broader issue facing America's singing dunes: how to balance public access and recreational use with the preservation of delicate acoustic systems. Unlike remote dunes in the Sahara or Gobi that are naturally protected by their inaccessibility, many American singing dunes are located within easy reach of major population centers, making them vulnerable to overuse and disturbance. In Utah's Coral Pink Sand Dunes State Park, we find another example of America's singing sands, though these dunes represent a different type of acoustic system entirely. Formed from Navajo sandstone eroded from the surrounding cliffs, these pink-hued dunes are composed of quartz grains stained with iron oxide, giving them their distinctive color and affecting their acoustic properties. The sounds produced by the coral pink dunes are generally softer and more musical than the booming of larger formations, creating gentle melodies that seem to whisper rather than shout. The Utah dunes also demonstrate the importance of geological context in determining acoustic characteristics. The Navajo sandstone source rock was itself formed from ancient sand dunes during the Jurassic period, meaning that the current singing dunes are essentially recycled versions of much older dune systems. This geological history has given the sand grains exceptional uniformity and rounding, as they have been through multiple cycles of erosion, transport, and deposition over millions of years. Arizona contributes its own unique voices to America's chorus of singing dunes, though many of these formations are smaller and less well known than their counterparts in neighboring states. The Algodones Dunes, which extend from southeastern California into southwestern Arizona, form part of one of North America's largest sand seas. While not as acoustically active as some other formations, these dunes do produce sounds under the right conditions, adding their voices to the desert's symphony. The cultural significance of America's singing dunes extends back to the indigenous peoples who first inhabited these desert regions. Native American tribes across the Southwest developed rich oral traditions around the voices of the sand, incorporating acoustic phenomena into their spiritual beliefs and practical knowledge systems. The Mojave people, whose traditional territory includes the Kelso Dunes, spoke of sand spirits that would sing to guide travelers and warn of approaching storms. Petroglyphs and other rock art found near singing dune formations suggest that ancient peoples paid close attention to the dunes, attention to acoustic phenomena in their environments. Some symbols appear to represent sound waves or acoustic activity, and their placement near known singing dunes may indicate that these sites held special significance for prehistoric communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that some Native American groups timed certain ceremonies and gatherings to coincide with periods of peak dune acoustic activity. European American exploration of the Southwest brought the first written descriptions of singing dunes in North America. Early accounts from the 19th century describe mysterious sounds in the desert that puzzled and sometimes frightened travelers. Military surveys during the expansion westward often noted unusual acoustic phenomena, though the scientific understanding needed to explain these observations wouldn't develop for another century. The development of the American West brought new challenges and opportunities for the preservation of singing dunes. Mining operations, railroad construction, and later highway development sometimes destroyed or altered important dune formations. However, the establishment of national parks, state parks, and wilderness areas has provided protection for many of the most significant acoustic sites. Modern research on American singing dunes has contributed significantly to our global understanding of sand acoustics. The accessibility of formations like Kelso dunes has allowed researchers to conduct detailed studies using sophisticated equipment that would be difficult to transport to more remote locations. These studies have revealed new insights into the physics of granular avalanches and the mechanisms of acoustic wave generation in sand masses. One particularly important discovery from American dune research is the role of surface crust formation in acoustic activity. Desert varnish and biological soil crusts that form on dune surfaces can significantly affect their ability to produce sound. The delicate balance between crust formation and destruction through natural processes helps explain why some dunes are only intermittently active acoustically. Climate change is beginning to affect America's singing dunes in complex ways. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns are altering the moisture regimes that are crucial for dune acoustic activity. Some formations are becoming more active as conditions become drier, while others are losing their voices as changing weather patterns disrupt the delicate balance of conditions needed for clear sound production. The urban growth of the American Southwest poses another challenge for singing dune preservation. Light pollution from expanding cities interferes with the traditional times when dune acoustic activity is most easily observed and appreciated. Noise pollution from highways and aircraft can mask the subtle sounds of smaller dune formations, reducing opportunities for public education and scientific research. Conservation efforts for American singing dunes involve a complex mix of federal, state, and local agencies, each with their own mandates and priorities. The Bureau of Land Management oversees many of the remote dune formations on public lands, while state parks manage others. Coordination between these agencies is essential for developing effective protection strategies that can preserve acoustic properties while allowing appropriate public access. Educational programs at sites like Kelso Dunes have helped raise public awareness about the importance of protecting these unique acoustic environments. Interpretive trails, guided tours, and citizen science programs engage visitors in learning about both the scientific mechanisms behind dune singing and the fragile nature of these acoustic systems. These programs emphasize the leave no trace principles that are essential for preserving the delicate surface conditions necessary for sound production. Research collaborations between American universities and international institutions have placed American singing dunes at the center of global efforts to understand sand acoustics. Studies conducted at Kelso Dunes have contributed to theoretical models that are used to predict acoustic behavior in sand systems worldwide. This research has applications beyond pure science, contributing to engineering projects involving granular materials and helping to develop new technologies for monitoring and controlling industrial sand processes. The unique position of American singing dunes within relatively accessible desert environments has made them valuable natural laboratories for testing new research technologies. Advanced acoustic monitoring equipment, seismic sensors, and high-speed cameras have all been deployed at American sites to capture detailed data about sand avalanche dynamics and sound generation mechanisms. These technological advances have then been applied to research at more remote singing dune locations around the world. Seasonal variation in acoustic activity at American dunes provides insights into how climate factors affect sand singing phenomena. The relatively predictable weather patterns of the American Southwest, combined with long-term climate records, have allowed researchers to correlate acoustic activity with specific meteorological conditions. This research is helping scientists understand how global climate change might affect singing dunes in different parts of the world. The sounds of America's hidden musicians remind us that our own continent holds acoustic treasures as remarkable as any found in the most exotic desert locations. In the deep booms of Kelso Dunes and the gentle whistles of Sand Mountain, we hear the voice of the American desert, a voice that speaks of vast space, system, and the endless creativity of natural processes. These are sounds that our ancestors heard, sounds that connected them to the living landscape around them, and sounds that we must preserve for future generations to discover and cherish. The singing dunes of America represent more than just geological curiosities. They are reminders of the complex relationships between physical processes, environmental conditions, and the emergence of unexpected beauty in seemingly barren places. They challenge us to listen more carefully to our surroundings, to appreciate the subtle symphonies that nature performs all around us, and to recognize our responsibility as stewards of these irreplaceable acoustic treasures. As the sun disappears behind the western horizon and the desert sky transforms from blazing gold to deep purple velvet, a magical transformation begins across the world's singing dunes. The harsh heat of day gives way to the gentle coolness of night, and with this change comes the most enchanting and mysterious period in the desert's acoustic cycle. This is when the night desert reveals its most intimate secrets, when the songs of the sand become lullabies that have soothed desert travelers and nocturnal creatures for countless millennia. Let's settle into this peaceful transition from day to night, allowing our senses to adjust to the subtle changes that occur as the desert prepares for its evening performance. The temperature differential between the scorching sand surface and the cooling night air creates gentle thermal currents that rise from the dune faces like invisible dancers, carrying with them the potential for acoustic activity that will soon fill the darkness with haunting melodies. In the gathering twilight, the physical properties of sand undergo subtle but important changes that affect their capacity for sound production. As temperatures drop, the thermal expansion that separated sand grains during the heat of the day begins to reverse, allowing the particles to settle into closer contact with each other. This increased grain-to-grain coupling enhances the transmission of vibrations through the sand mass, creating more efficient acoustic wave propagation and clearer, more resonant tones. The cooling desert air becomes denser and more stable, reducing the turbulence that can scatter and distort sound waves during daylight hours. This atmospheric clarity acts like a natural acoustic lens, focusing and amplifying the sounds produced by dune avalanches while allowing them to travel much greater distances across the desert landscape. Sounds that might be barely audible during the day can carry for miles through the still night air, creating an acoustic environment of remarkable clarity and range. As true darkness settles over the desert, our other senses become heightened in compensation for the loss of visual input. The subtlest sounds become magnified in importance. The whisper of wind across sand ridges, the distant call of a nighthawk, and underneath it all, the deep, patient breathing of the dunes themselves. This is when the desert's acoustic character becomes most apparent, when the singing sands reveal their full range of voices from the softest whisper to the deepest boom. The night desert's acoustic palette is remarkably diverse, encompassing sounds that span the entire range of human hearing and beyond. High-frequency whistles and hums dance along dune crests where the lightest breezes set surface grains in motion. Mid-range tones emerge from smaller avalanches on steep faces, creating melodic phrases that rise and fall like musical conversations. Deep bass notes rumble up from the hearts of the largest dunes, vibrations so low and powerful that they seem to emanate from the earth itself. Nocturnal wildlife adds its own voices to the desert's evening symphony. Desert foxes picking their way across sandy slopes trigger tiny avalanches that produce delicate tinkling sounds, like natural wind chimes responding to the animal's passage. Kangaroo rats, those remarkable desert rodents that can survive without ever drinking water, create miniature acoustic events as they bound across dune faces in search of seeds and shelter. The acoustic behavior of bats hunting over singing dunes creates fascinating interactions between biological and geological sound production. These aerial hunters use echolocation calls in frequency ranges that can interact with the acoustic emissions of the dunes themselves. Some researchers have speculated that certain bat species may use dune songs as acoustic landmarks, helping them navigate across seemingly featureless desert landscapes during their nightly hunting expeditions. Insect life in the night desert contributes its own acoustic elements to the sandy symphony. Cricket species that have adapted to desert conditions often time their calling to coincide with periods of minimal dune activity, avoiding acoustic interference with their mating songs. Conversely, some desert beetles seem to be attracted to the vibrations produced by singing sand, perhaps using these signals to locate areas of loose sand suitable for burrowing. The psychological and physiological effects of exposure to night desert acoustics are profound and well documented. The combination of extreme quiet interrupted by natural sound events creates a heightened state of auditory awareness that many people find deeply relaxing and meditative. The low-frequency components of dune songs can induce states similar to those produced by meditation practices, with measurable effects on brainwave patterns and stress hormone levels. Indigenous desert peoples developed sophisticated understanding of nighttime acoustic patterns, using this knowledge for both practical and spiritual purposes. Traditional navigation techniques included the ability to identify location and direction based on the acoustic signatures of different dune formations. Experienced desert travelers could distinguish between the voices of various singing dune sites, using this acoustic information to maintain course during nighttime travel when visual landmarks were difficult to discern. Spiritual practices among desert cultures often incorporated acoustic elements, with ceremonies timed to coincide with periods of peak dune activity. The deep, resonant tones produced by large dunes during optimal conditions were believed to facilitate communication with spiritual realms, and many traditional desert religions include references to sacred voices that emerge from the sand during times of prayer and meditation. Modern sound recording technology has allowed researchers to capture and analyze the full complexity of nighttime desert acoustics with unprecedented detail. Digital recording equipment deployed at remote dune sites operates continuously, building libraries of acoustic data that reveal patterns invisible to casual observation. These recordings show that dune acoustic activity follows complex rhythms influenced by temperature cycles, humidity variations, and subtle changes in atmospheric pressure. Spectral analysis of nighttime dune recordings reveals harmonic structures of remarkable sophistication. The sounds are not simple tones, but complex acoustic events involving multiple frequency components that interact in mathematically precise relationships. Some dunes produce what musicians would recognize as natural chords, with fundamental tones accompanied by harmonics and overtones that create rich, music-like soundscapes. The phenomenon of acoustic coupling between dunes becomes most apparent during nighttime observations. When atmospheric conditions are optimal, researchers have documented instances where acoustic events at one dune location trigger sympathetic responses in formations many miles away. These acoustic networks can span entire desert regions, creating coordinated soundscapes that suggest a level of environmental integration that challenges traditional understanding of how isolated geological formations can interact. Seasonal variations in nighttime acoustic activity provide insights into the relationship between desert ecology and geophysical processes. During winter months in temperate deserts, lower temperatures and occasional precipitation create periods of acoustic dormancy when the dunes fall silent. But as spring arrives and the desert begins its annual warming cycle, the first tentative night songs begin to emerge, often starting as barely audible whispers that gradually build in intensity and complexity as conditions become more favorable. The acoustic signature of different desert seasons tells the story of the annual cycle of life and death, moisture and aridity, activity and rest that governs desert ecosystems. Spring nights bring the delicate sounds of new sand movement as winter stability gives way to renewed wind activity. Summer nights roar with the full voice of the desert, when extreme dryness and strong thermal gradients create ideal conditions for spectacular acoustic displays. Autumn nights sing with a different quality, as cooling temperatures create more sustained but gentler acoustic events. Human response to nighttime desert acoustics appears to be deeply ingrained in our evolutionary heritage. Archaeological evidence suggests that our ancestors lived in close contact with desert environments for significant periods during human evolution, and exposure to natural acoustic environments like those created by singing dunes may have influenced the development of human musical sensibilities. The mathematical relationships found in dune harmonics mirror those found in musical traditions from around the world. Modern meditation and wellness practices increasingly recognize the therapeutic value of natural soundscapes, with particular attention to the low-frequency components that characterize singing dune emissions. Sound therapy practitioners use recordings of desert acoustics to help clients achieve states of deep relaxation and stress relief. The combination of rhythmic patterns and harmonic complexity found in dune songs appears to be particularly effective for inducing the brain states associated with healing and restoration. The vulnerability of nighttime desert acoustics to human interference highlights the importance of preserving these environments in their natural state. Light pollution from urban areas can disrupt the traditional rhythms of desert life, affecting both the behavior of nocturnal animals and the thermal cycles that influence dune acoustic activity. Noise pollution from highways, aircraft, and industrial activities can mask the subtle sounds that make night desert experiences so profound and meaningful. Climate change impacts on nighttime desert acoustics are becoming increasingly apparent as researchers compile longer-term data sets. Changes in temperature patterns, humidity levels, and wind systems all affect the delicate conditions necessary for optimal dune singing. Some traditional singing sites are experiencing reduced nighttime activity as changing climate conditions alter the thermal and moisture regimes that have supported their acoustic properties for thousands of years. Conservation efforts focused on preserving nighttime acoustic environments face unique challenges, as the qualities that make these soundscapes valuable are difficult to quantify and protect through conventional regulatory approaches. Dark sky preservation initiatives, which focus on reducing light pollution, often provide indirect benefits for acoustic environments by maintaining the natural rhythms that support both astronomical observation and acoustic appreciation. The night desert's lullaby represents one of Earth's most ancient and enduring musical traditions, a performance that has continued without interruption for millions of years. In its gentle rhythms and haunting melodies, we hear the voice of time itself, the patient accumulation of moments and movements that shapes our world, grain by grain, breath by breath. These are the sounds that surrounded our ancestors as they gazed up at the same stars we see today, sounds that connect us to the deep history of our planet and remind us of our place in the vast symphony of natural processes that continue to unfold around us, night after peaceful night. As our journey through the world's singing deserts draws to a gentle close, let's take a moment to settle back into the quiet comfort of your own space, carrying with you the echoes of all the remarkable voices we've encountered together. The ancient songs of the Sahara, the thunderous whispers of China's great dunes, the melodic conversations between sand and sea in Namibia, and the hidden harmonies of America's desert musicians. All these voices now live within your memory, adding their music to the soundtrack of your dreams. There's something profoundly moving about discovering that our planet harbors such unexpected musicians, that in the most seemingly lifeless and barren places, nature has found ways to create beauty that surpasses anything human imagination might conceive. The singing dunes remind us that wonder is always waiting to be discovered, often hiding in plain sight in landscapes we might otherwise dismiss as empty or inhospitable. Think about the incredible journey that every grain of sand must complete before it can contribute to these natural orchestras. Born in the crushing forces that break down mountains, carried by rivers across continents, sorted and polished by ocean waves, lifted by winds and shaped by countless storms, each tiny crystal holds within itself the accumulated experiences of geological time. When millions of these grains come together in just the right conditions, they create something greater than the sum of their parts, a collective voice that speaks of patience, persistence, and the hidden connections that bind all things together. The science we've explored reveals the elegant complexity underlying these natural phenomena, showing us how simple physical processes can combine to create behaviors of stunning sophistication. The synchronization of colliding sand grains, the acoustic coupling between distant dunes, the mathematical precision of harmonic relationships. All of these demonstrate that the natural world operates according to principles of order and beauty that we're only beginning to understand. In the songs of the desert, we hear evidence of the deep mathematical structures that govern our universe, the same patterns and ratios that appear in seashells and galaxies, in musical compositions and architectural masterpieces. But perhaps what's most remarkable about singing dunes is how they challenge our assumptions about what constitutes life and consciousness in the natural world. While we know that these acoustic phenomena arise from purely physical processes, there's something almost intentional about the way dunes respond to environmental conditions, the way they seem to choose their moments for performance, the way they call and respond to each other across vast distances. They remind us that the boundary between living and non-living systems may be more fluid than we typically imagine. The cultural stories we've encountered, from Marco Polo's supernatural interpretations to the navigation traditions of desert nomads, show us how human beings have always sought meaning in the mysterious voices of the sand. These stories reveal our deep need to find purpose and intelligence in the natural phenomena around us, and they remind us that scientific understanding doesn't diminish wonder, but rather deepens it. Knowing how dunes sing doesn't make their voices less magical. It makes us more appreciative of the intricate beauty of the physical laws that govern our world. As we face the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation that threaten many of the world's singing dune formations, these natural musicians become even more precious. They serve as sensitive indicators of environmental health, their voices fading when conditions shift beyond the delicate parameters necessary for their acoustic activity. Protecting singing dunes means preserving not just individual formations, but entire desert ecosystems, maintaining the complex relationships between climate, geology, and biology that sustain these remarkable phenomena. The therapeutic and meditative qualities of desert acoustics offer us something increasingly rare in our noisy, hurried world: the gift of deep listening. In a time when we're constantly bombarded by artificial sounds and digital distractions, the pure tones of singing sand invite us to slow down, to pay attention, to rediscover the profound peace that comes from connecting with natural rhythms that operate on timescales far grander than our daily concerns. Indigenous wisdom traditions have long recognized the healing power of natural soundscapes, understanding that certain acoustic environments can restore balance to both body and mind. Modern research is beginning to confirm what traditional peoples have always known: that exposure to natural sound patterns can reduce stress, improve sleep, enhance creativity, and promote overall well-being. The low-frequency components of dune songs, in particular, seem to resonate with something fundamental in human physiology, perhaps awakening ancestral memories of times when our ancestors lived in intimate contact with the natural world. The singing dunes also offer us lessons about resilience and adaptation. These formations have survived ice ages and periods of extreme climate change, adjusting to new conditions while maintaining their essential character. They show us that stability doesn't require rigidity, that it's possible to bend without breaking, to change without losing one's core identity. In a world where flexibility and adaptability are increasingly important survival skills, the dunes model a kind of dynamic equilibrium that we might learn from. The collaborative nature of dune singing, the way millions of individual grains must work together to create collective music, offers insights relevant to our social and political challenges. Just as sand grains must be uniform in size and shape to create clear tones, human communities function best when there's both diversity and common ground, when individual differences are balanced by shared values and goals. The acoustic coupling between distant dunes suggests that even seemingly isolated systems can be connected in ways that aren't immediately apparent, reminding us of our own interconnectedness across geographical and cultural boundaries. As you prepare to drift off to sleep, carrying these desert songs with you into your dreams, consider the profound gift that singing dunes represent. They are proof that beauty can emerge from the simplest materials under the right conditions, that music exists everywhere in nature, if we have the patience and sensitivity to listen for it, and that even the most apparently barren landscapes can harbor secrets that inspire wonder and awe. The next time you encounter sand, whether it's on a beach, in an hourglass, or scattered on a sidewalk, remember that you're looking at potential musicians, tiny crystals that might, under different circumstances, contribute to one of Earth's most magnificent natural symphonies. Every grain carries within itself the possibility of song, just as every moment in our lives carries the potential for wonder if we approach it with the right attitude and attention. The world is full of singing, in the whisper of wind through trees, in the rhythm of waves against shore, in the complex harmonies that emerge when natural systems interact in ways we're only beginning to understand. The singing dunes are just one voice in this planetary chorus, but they're a voice of particular power and beauty, one that connects us to the deep time of geology, while reminding us of our responsibility to listen carefully to the world around us. So as you close your eyes and let sleep carry you away from the waking world, let the memory of desert songs accompany you. Let their ancient rhythms slow your breathing. Let their harmonic patterns quiet your thoughts. Let their timeless patience remind you that some of the most important things in life, growth, healing, understanding, love, unfold slowly and gently, like sand accumulating grain by grain into formations of unexpected beauty. The singing dunes will continue their concerts long after we're gone, their voices carrying forward through time the same messages they've always sung, that patience creates beauty, that cooperation produces harmony, that even in the most challenging conditions, life finds a way to express itself with grace and wonder. These are good thoughts to carry into sleep, gentle reminders that we live on a planet that sings if we take the time to listen, that creates music from the simplest materials, that offers us daily invitations to wonder and appreciation if we're wise enough to accept them. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the peaceful songs of sand and wind, time and silence, the eternal lullabies that the desert sings to anyone willing to listen with an open heart and a quiet mind. Good night.